In the small fishing village of Asi Trezza, nestled near Catania, in the province of Sicily during the turbulent times of the 1860s, there lives a family of hard-working and honest fishermen, known by the ironic nickname of the Malavoglia, which means the lazy ones, though nothing could be further from the truth of their industrious and dedicated nature. The true family name is Toscano, but the nickname has stuck. Perhaps given in mockery, or perhaps in the peculiar way that small villagers name their inhabitants based on some long-forgotten story or jest. The family is led by Padrone Tony, an elderly widower of extraordinary resilience and wisdom, who lives in a modest house by the medlar tree. The Casa del Nespolo, a dwelling that has belonged to his family for generations, and serves as their anchor and identity in the community. Living with Padrone Tony is his son, Bastianazzo, a strong and capable fisherman in the prime of his life, and Bastianazzo's wife, Maria, nicknamed La Longa, despite being anything but tall. A woman of remarkable patience and strength, who manages the household and its finances with careful attention and worry. The couple has 5 children, and Tony, the eldest, a young man full of restless ambition and dreams. Luca, strong and dependable. Mina, a beautiful daughter whose marriage prospects bring both hope and anxiety to the family. Alessio, the youngest son, industrious and devoted. And Laia, the youngest daughter, innocent and vulnerable, whose beauty and potential trouble her protective relatives. The family's relatively stable existence is threatened when young Nontani departs for military service, a duty required by law, leaving the family without one of its primary workers and supports at a critical moment. To compensate for this loss of income, the elderly Padrone Tony makes a fateful business decision, investing the family's limited capital in a large shipment of lupins, coarse, black beans intended for sale in the nearby town of Riposte, at a significant profit. This venture is undertaken with the help of a loan from Uncle Crucifix Dumbbell, a shrewd and merciless moneylender who cares nothing for the family's welfare and sees only the opportunity to gain wealth through interest and penalties. The beans are carefully loaded onto the family's modest sailing ship, the Providenza, which means Providence, or Divine Providence, a ship that carries the family's hopes and dreams along with its cargo. Padrone Tony entrusts the cargo and the ship to his son, Bastianazzo, confident that the young man's strength and seamanship will ensure the voyage's success and the family's prosperity. But fate has other plans, and the sea, which has provided sustenance to the family for generations, suddenly turns against them with terrible fury. During the voyage to Riposto, a sudden and violent storm strikes the Providenza with tremendous force, and the ship, battered and overwhelmed by the power of the tempest, begins to sink beneath the waves, carrying with it the entire cargo of lupins. In this tragedy, the ship and its cargo are completely lost, and worst of all, Bastianazzo himself perishes in the storm, drowning in the treacherous waters, along with the hopes and dreams of his family. The news of his death strikes Padrone Tony with the weight of an enormous burden, for he has lost not only his son and the cargo, but also his ability to repay the debt to Uncle Crucifix Dumbbell, the relentless moneylender who now holds the family's fortunes in his grasping hands. The family finds itself suddenly burdened with triple misfortune: the debt incurred from purchasing the lupins on credit, the necessity of repairing or replacing the Providenza, and the devastating loss of Bastianazzo, a young man full of vitality and essential to the family's survival and prosperity. The recovery and repair of the damaged ship consume additional money and resources the family does not possess, deepening their financial crises and their vulnerability to the moneylender's demands. When young Nontani returns home after completing his military service, the family hoped for relief and assistance in their suffering, but instead they find that he has been changed by his experiences. Having seen the wider world beyond Asi Trezza, with its riches and splendors, and he returns reluctant and disillusioned, unwilling to resume the laborious and humble life of a fisherman. And Tony's return is marked by bitterness and dissatisfaction rather than by the joyful relief that his family had anticipated. And instead of being a support to his family in their time of greatest need, he becomes a source of additional worry and concern. The family's misfortunes continue to mount with terrible regularity, as if some curse has been placed upon them by the sea and fate itself. Luca, one of Padrone Tony's grandsons, and Antoni's younger brother, is drafted into military service to fight in a distant war, and he is sent to participate in the Battle of Lissa, a naval engagement of great importance. During this battle, Luca is killed in action, dying far from his family and homeland, and the news of his death brings renewed grief and sorrow to the family. His death not only adds to their emotional suffering, but also has devastating practical consequences, for it breaks the betrothal between his sister Mina and Brasi Sapala, a young man of some standing in the community. as the scandal and shame of having a dead soldier in the family somehow damages the family's reputation in marriage, prospects in the tight-knit and judgmental community. The crushing weight of debt continues to grow, and Uncle Crucifix Dumbbell, represented by his assistant Goosefoot, relentlessly demands payment, sending stamped papers and legal notices to the family, making clear his determination to collect what he is owed. The family's beloved Casa del Nespolo, the house by the medlar tree that has belonged to them for generations and represents their identity, their history, and their place in the community, is seized by the moneylender to satisfy the debt, and the family is forced to sell their Providenza to raise money to attempt to buy back their home. This loss of the house represents not merely the loss of property, but the loss of their dignity, their security, and their connection to their ancestors and traditions. Without the house, the family finds itself homeless and displaced, renting small hovels and struggling to maintain their dignity and reputation in a community where they have always been known as the Malavoglia, a family of some standing despite their modest means. The family's fortunes reach humiliating levels of poverty, and the respect and consideration that the community once showed them gradually erodes and disappears. Further, tragedy strikes when another wreck of the Providenza, the repaired fishing boat now owned by the family, nearly costs Padrone Tony his life in a terrible accident at sea. Though fortunately he manages to recover from his injuries, despite his advanced age and fragile condition. Then comes yet another calamity: Mataruzza, the wife of Bastianazzo and the mother of the 5 children. The woman who has held the family together through all their suffering and trials dies of cholera, a disease that strikes the community like an invisible assassin, taking young and old alike. Her death represents the final destruction of the family's stability, for she was the emotional and practical center of their lives, the one who managed the household and provided comfort and hope during their darkest times. Noni, the eldest grandson, finds himself increasingly unable to accept the restricted life dictated by tradition and harsh poverty, and he grows restless with his duties to the family and with the humble work of fishing. The temptation of the wider world that he glimpsed during his military service pulls at his heart and mind, and he makes the fateful decision to leave the family and seek his fortune elsewhere, hoping to find prosperity and freedom in distant towns and cities. When Antoni departs from ACI Trezza, the family loses one of its remaining workers and supporters, forcing them into even more desperate circumstances, and they are compelled to sell the repaired Providenza to raise money to attempt to reclaim the Casa del Nespolo, which has never been forgotten and which they yearn to return to with every fiber of their beings. But Tony's journey in search of fortune proves futile and disastrous, for he returns to ACI Trezza, destitute and empty-handed, his dreams shattered and his hopes destroyed by a harsh world that offers no mercy to poor fishermen seeking their way forward. Upon his return, Antoni has become a broken man, bearing no resemblance to the idealistic youth who departed full of hope and determination. He has lost all desire to work and take up the humble labor of fishing, finding it beneath him and unsuitable for a man who has seen the world beyond his village. He turns to drinking and idleness, spending his days in the local osteria, the tavern, where he consumes wine and complains about his fate, becoming a burden to his family rather than a support. The mistress of the Osteria Santuzza, who is a woman of questionable virtue, coveted by the powerful Dom Michel, a brigade officer of the Coast Guard, becomes infatuated with Antoni and serves him freely at the tavern, hoping to secure his affection and loyalty. But Santuzza's hopes for Antoni are ultimately disappointed, for he shows her little respect or gratitude for her kindness, and her lamentations about his behavior only strengthen his determination to ignore her feelings and her devotion. Meanwhile, Dom Michel, angered by Antoni's presence in Santuzza's life and viewing him as a rival for her affections, begins to harass and threaten Antoni, and the two men's rivalry grows increasingly intense and dangerous. The confrontation between Nani and Don Michel eventually escalates into violence during an anti-smuggling raid conducted by the Coast Guard, during which the two men engage in a fierce brawl, and in the heat of passion and rage, Antoni draws a dagger and stabs Don Michel in the chest, grievously wounding him. Antoni is immediately arrested and brought to trial for the assault on a government official, and the villagers gathered to hear the charges against him and to witness his trial. During the proceedings, Padrone Tony, the elderly patriarch of the family, hears rumors and false reports about a supposed relationship between Don Michel and his young granddaughter Leah, and the shock of this news, combined with the horror of witnessing his grandson's trial for such a crime, causes him to suffer a massive stroke from which he never fully recovers. After his stroke, Padrone Tony becomes old in both body and spirit, his mind slipping away into confusion and disorientation. and he spends his remaining days reciting proverbs and fragments of wisdom without much awareness of what is happening around him or of the suffering of his remaining family members. Laia, the younger sister, becomes the victim of vicious gossip and scandal in the village. For rumors of her supposed affair with Don Michel spread rapidly through the community, and though the rumors are false, the damage to her reputation is irreparable and catastrophic. Unable to bear the shame and the condemnation of the community, Leah makes the desperate decision to run away from Aci Trezza and abandon her family, turning to prostitution in distant towns to support herself. A tragedy that brings final humiliation and sorrow to the entire family. Mina, despite her love for Alfio Musca, a hardworking young man who drives a donkey cart and has always treated her with kindness and respect, decides that she cannot marry him because of the shameful situation of her sister and the scandal that surrounds their family. Instead of accepting Alfio's proposal and pursuing her own happiness, she chooses to remain at home to care for her younger siblings, Alessi and Nunziata's children, sacrificing her own future and her chance at love for the sake of family duty and the needs of her relatives. Alessi, the youngest son, becomes the last hope of the family, and he works tirelessly and with extraordinary dedication to earn money through whatever means he can find, determined to reclaim the Casa del Nespolo and restore the family's dignity and standing in the community. This period represents the last moment of happiness for Padrone Antoni, the elderly patriarch, who clings to the hope that somehow the family's fortunes will be restored, and that the house by the medlar tree will once again belong to the Malavoglia. But this wish is never granted. For Padrone Tony dies on the very day that he is scheduled to return to the house, his death occurring before he can achieve the final satisfaction of seeing his family restored to their ancestral home and their rightful place in the community. His death represents the end of an era, the final chapter in the story of the old Malavoglia, and he passes into history carrying with him the dignity and strength that characterized his life. Despite the overwhelming tragedies and sufferings that he endured, Antoni, when he is finally released from prison after serving his sentence in the galleys, returns to Aci Trezza, changed and hardened by his experiences, but he discovers that he cannot stay in his native village because of all the harm that he has caused and all the pain that he has inflicted upon his family and his community. He realizes that by his actions and his departure into crime and violence, he has excluded himself from his family by systematically denying and rejecting the values that his grandfather, Padrone Antoni, held sacred and which have sustained the family through all their trials and sufferings. The Malavoglia family, once proud and hard-working, is scattered and broken, their house lost, their members dispersed, their dreams shattered by the cruel and indifferent forces of poverty, fate, and circumstance that care nothing for the dignity and honor of simple people struggling to survive in a harsh and unforgiving world. Yet, despite all their suffering and defeat, the spirit of Padrone Tony and the values he embodied continue to resonate through the actions and choices of his descendants, particularly through the devoted work of young Alessi, who continues to struggle and strive to reclaim the family's home and restore their dignity. A quest that may never be fully realized, but which testifies to the enduring power of family loyalty and tradition. Even in the face of overwhelming adversity and defeat,